fix or rely on our own resources and skill set to navigate our way through them. But what do we do when we need God's wisdom? When we know that the answer to our problem is not going to lie within ourselves or anywhere on planet Earth, what do we do with that? Well, that's the topic for this video today. We are going to talk about how to get God's wisdom, how to apply it to our life, and how to trust Him as we do. And I don't mind telling you that this particular topic is very close to my heart right now. I was recently a guest on a podcast, and the host sent me a bunch of questions before our time together when we recorded. And one of them was, share something with us that God is teaching you right now. And I have to tell you, I love that question. And I love it for two reasons. Number one, it really causes you to stop and reflect on what God is doing in your life and His activity in your life. And number two, it really allows you to be vulnerable and talk about some of your struggles. No way do I ever want to appear to portray a picture of perfection or that I don't struggle. I want to let you see my struggles and talk about them, because that is what we can learn from each other and relate to each other is vulnerability. No one can relate to perfection. It's just not possible. So this is it's very close to my heart today because it's exactly what I told her, something that God is doing in my life and something that He is teaching me. So since we're live here, we're going to begin by identifying common ways when we encounter a problem. What do we do initially? What is our default or our common go-to that we do first? So I'm going to list these, and if it resonates with you and it's something that you can identify with, just put your hand up or say, hey, that really resonates with me, or I can identify with that. That's a struggle for me big time. Number one, it is looking to someone else to tell you what to do. Just tell me what to do. Sometimes it's so much easier to have someone just tell us what to do. Immediate gratification. We might look to someone that we trust, someone who we value their opinion. They are a wise person. They know us. They have our best interest in mind. I know myself, I often turn to my husband and my dad, maybe a close friend, people that I consider to be wise, that I know have my best interest in mind. Not that it's wrong to go to them, but when we need God's wisdom, it's not going to come from other people. How about you? Do you tend to look to other people to just tell you what to do? And sometimes it's just tempting because we want an answer now. We want to know now what to do. So there is that immediate gratification. Number two, our own critical thinking. We get out our legal pad and we make our list of pros and cons, and we use our own critical thinking to analyze data and try to figure out the best solution for ourselves. Number three, research. This one speaks to me big time. If we don't know something, we research it or we Google it. I am a researcher big time. I mean, if I need to buy a new blender, I can't just walk into Walmart spontaneously and just pick one off the shelf. No, I have to research it for weeks and find out what the consumer reports say about each particular model, and you just make sure that the reviews are good. I read all of the reviews on Amazon or wherever I'm shopping for a blender. My girlfriend makes fun of me all the time. She called me recently and said, hey Jen, I need to buy a sweeper. Have you done research on that recently? Because she knows I am a researcher before I make a purchase or anything like that. So oftentimes, if we don't know the answer to something, we Google it. We turn to Google, we research it, we try to look to statistics, or we just try to figure out the problem in research. Or sometimes we use our feelings to be a compass, and we look to our feelings to direct where we should go. That is a scary place to be because our comfort level cannot determine oftentimes the best course of action, and it can never determine God's wisdom. But sometimes we turn to that. We look to our own feelings or emotions to determine our direction, and that's a scary place to be. Sometimes denial. We think if we ignore a problem, it'll just go away or it won't get any worse. I can't really relate to that on a personal level. However, there is one time when I did ignore it. I tried to ignore a problem, and it was, interestingly, I was sitting in my family room and I heard a scratching on my wall. And I thought, oh, that's odd. I wonder what that is. You got to understand, I cannot stand anything creepy, crawly, rodents, anything like that. So the thought did cross my mind, could it be a mouse? No, it can't be a mouse. It must be a tree. Now, we have a lot of woods and trees around our house, but none that are in close proximity to scratch my wall, my outer wall. But I just blew it off as being a tree. So months go by, and periodically I would hear that, and I would just convince myself it must be just a tree. I don't know where I thought this tree was or how this limb was somehow scratching my wall, but I convinced myself it was just a tree. And then my son heard one in his bedroom, and he was working for someone in the maintenance department at the time. And he said, Mom, I asked my boss, and he said, if there's any chance that it can be a mouse or a rodent of any kind, we would be wise to take care of the problem now, because infestations can get out of control. So I called, and they kind of talked me out of it and said, it doesn't really sound like it's a rodent. They talked me out of it. So took no further action. Well, months later, I heard that same noise in my bedroom. Now, we never saw a mouse in our house, never saw any droppings, until one day I saw droppings coming from my ceiling in from a vent onto the floor. Well, you better believe it. I got on the phone and I called an exterminator. No more denying or ignoring the fact at that point. And they came out, and sure enough, we had mice in the walls of our home. Evidently, they weren't getting in our house. I never saw one, but there were suburbs of mice in various neighborhoods in the exterior frame of my house, in between the wall and the outer wall, like the insulation part. And so they came in and they did treatments. It took several times for them to come out to treat these mice suburbs. Finally, we got rid of them. But that is a perfect illustration how you can't ignore certain problems and think they're just going to go away, or that it's a tree that's just scratching your wall. Yeah, no. Full-blown suburbs, mice cities in the walls of my house. Yeah, don't typically ignore. That's not a typical go-to of mine, but that is one time when I did. I tend to relate to the next one, which is to obsess about the problem, to think about it all the time, to overthink about it, to just let your mind go into overdrive. That's more my style. How about you? Do you obsess or overthink when you have a problem? The next is manipulating things or other people to try to get the outcome that you desire. That sometimes could creep in subtly, and we don't even realize that we're trying to do it, but we're trying to get control, and we're trying to get things to go the way we want them to. God's wisdom is not the wisdom of the world, and God's wisdom cannot be found anywhere on earth. So we can go down that list and we can try as we might, but none of those will ever equate to God's wisdom, because God's wisdom comes from God and God alone. Thankfully, his word tells us exactly what we can do to get God's wisdom, and it even tells us what not to do. So we're going to look into James 1, which contains for us sort of like a recipe for wisdom, for God's wisdom. But before we just dive into those verses that pertain to God's wisdom, let's just back it up and just take a look at this context, because the verses that immediately precede the portion where James addresses wisdom, he says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance." So there's a link that talks about trials of all kinds and God's wisdom that comes right after it. There's a reality here that when we face trials, we face pain. When we encounter pain, we look for ways to get help and relief. That's true even in the physical realm. In fact, the number one symptom that drives people to an emergency room is pain. I can remember one of the nursing professors telling us that in college, and that never left me. And she's right. I can attest to that now, working in a hospital and seeing what comes in our emergency room. So yes, that's true. So this recipe for God's wisdom, listen to James 1, verse 5. Now this is from the New Living Translation. It tells us, "If you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and he will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking." So if we look at this as a recipe, number one, we're told, if you need God, If you need wisdom, ask. So number one, if you need wisdom, acknowledge the fact that you need wisdom. Don't hold back. Acknowledge the fact, hey, I need wisdom. I think of a child in a classroom when they raise their hand, me, yes, me. And then we're told, if you need wisdom, ask our generous God. See, there are two different things. You can raise your hand. You can acknowledge that you need wisdom without asking. So we need to acknowledge our need and then ask our generous God, and he will give it to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. So we see in this recipe that we must believe and not doubt. We're going to come back to that in just a minute. But let's look at what is yielded from this recipe. When we apply this from God's word, he tells us that God will give it to you. God will give it to you. When you ask him for wisdom, he will, and he will not rebuke you for asking. You know, I just love that that is placed in this portion of his word, that he's never going to, he invites us to come to him to ask for wisdom. He's never going to say, why are you asking me this, or become angry. So we don't need to be fearful when we come to him. We can come in assurance that he will give it to us, and he's not going to rebuke us for asking. He's not going to make you feel stupid. He's not going to try to trip you up. He won't rebuke you for asking. He invites you to come and ask. So let's go back to the principle of believing and not doubt. And this is where I want to share with you what God has been teaching me. Because in the moment when you pray and you ask God for wisdom, we need to have faith. Faith that he hears us, and faith that he will answer. He will give us the wisdom that we ask for. So we come in faith believing those things and not doubting. See, I'm real good at that part. I'm real good in the heat of the moment, coming to him. I know he hears me. I know he cares about what I'm asking him for. And I do believe he's going to fill me with his wisdom as I ask. The problem is when you have to leave that place of initial prayer and you move forward, decisions need to be made and directions need to be taken. And we need to act on the wisdom that God has given you. Yes, we continue to pray in that posture of prayer. After that initial prayer, we continue to pray. We continue to seek him. We continue to keep our Bibles open. That's how he speaks to his people primarily. And he's going to direct us in his word. And we're going to wait on him. We don't want to rush ahead of him. We want to wait on him, hear from him, and then apply what he tells us accordingly. And sometimes in that moment, when you walk forward and you need to start applying what he's teaching you, that's where things can get a little dicey. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's where we are tempted to freak out. At least I know I am. Our thoughts start to just go. Like we start to doubt. Did God really say this? Did God really tell me to do this? We have fearful thoughts creep up. Like, what if I mess this up? What if I go this way, but I really heard God wrong and I'm supposed to go that way? What if I get hurt in the process of this? What if someone else gets hurt? What if our finances take a huge dive if I do what God's calling me to do? And the list goes on. And then our feelings get a hold of us and we feel overwhelmed. We feel insecure because it doesn't feel right. We feel uncomfortable and we feel like we've lost control. And in that moment, when our thoughts are racing and our feelings are going wackadoodle, we are tempted to stop and retreat and pivot and just go a different direction because we're overwhelmed and we're scared and we doubt. This is such a common struggle. And the reason why is because God's ways are not like our ways. They often won't make sense to us. I think of Noah and what God called Noah to do. It made no sense to Noah to build an ark for all of those years. Can you even imagine? They never even saw rain on the planet, yet he chiseled away at his obedience. Oftentimes, he leads us in unexpected ways. We didn't see this coming. We wouldn't have chosen to go this way. I think of the Israelites when the Lord rescued them from captivity and brought them out of that place, and he led them to the edge of the Red Sea. I'm sure they didn't see that coming. Talk about unexpected. And then there are ways that we just feel uncomfortable. We might be mocked or persecuted. Again, Noah, they mocked and persecuted him. They thought he was crazy. And years went by as he chiseled away at obedience and he trusted God. Then there are also, we just don't want to do what God's calling us to do. I think of Noah. Noah did not want to go to Nineveh. He didn't want to go preach to those people. He didn't like the whole situation. Sometimes God calls us to do things that just flat out make us feel uncomfortable. Sometimes there's a sacrifice involved, and moving forward involves sacrifice. And we don't even like the word sacrifice. Sacrifice isn't something that appeals to us. Yet Jesus said, to follow him, you must take up your cross and follow me. Sometimes we just feel like we've lost control. And there's a good reason for that too. It's because we did. When we surrender to him and we follow Jesus rather than ourselves, we forfeit our own control, our own desire to be our own boss and be our own control, and we yield to him. So what do we do in the midst of all of this? Well, the good news is we can choose to walk in faith and not freak out. God said he will give us wisdom, so we can choose to trust that he will be good on his word, that we won't doubt, as we're told in his word, don't doubt when you ask, but believe. So how do we apply this to our daily life that we walk in faith and not freak out? Well, number one, we don't want to be double-minded, as this portion of scripture tells us. We don't want to waffle between, I trust you, God, and then in the next moment, oh, I got this. I got this. I trust you, God. I'm not so sure about this anymore. And then we do feel like a wave tossed in the wind. You know, as only God would do. I told you I've been struggling in this exact area. I happened to find a notepad where I just journaled one day how I was feeling. And I happened to be in this exact text that we're going over today, praying for God's wisdom. And I underlined these verses also from the New Living Translation when he said, but when you ask him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. Do not waver, for a person with divided loyalty is unsettled as a wave is in the sea that is blown and tossed by the wind. Such people should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Their loyalty is divided between God and the world, and they are unstable in all that they do. And that last part, their loyalty is divided between God and the world, was such a reality check to me that, Lord, my loyalty is with you. And it's a reality check, jolt in that moment. My loyalty is to you. So forgive me for being like a wave and unstable in all of this, surrendering to you in 1 minute and then taking it right back up and trying to control it the next. I'm in the middle of publishing this Bible, the most recent Bible study that I've written, and it's just moving forward to production. And it has been problem after problem after problem. And I have needed to seek God's wisdom on many different things. And I have felt many times like that wave waffling, and that reality check of, wait a minute, where's my loyalty here? It is not divided between God and the world. Lord, forgive me for letting my gaze shift. Help me to align it back on you. And number two, Proverbs 3:5-6 tells us to trust in the Lord with all of our heart. So there's a trust issue here in the midst of the uncertainty, in the midst of the uneasiness, and in the midst of the uncomfortableness, to choose to trust the Lord and lean not on our own understanding. Again, it's that waffling. I trust you, Lord, but then being tempted to lean into our own understanding. We need to not do that and to lean into him. And remember that it's not a plan that we follow, it's a person, and it's Jesus. And then remember that he will direct our paths. As we acknowledge him in all of our ways, he will direct our paths. So as we're seeking him, as we are asking him to fill us with his wisdom, and as he does guide our steps and we apply what he's showing us to do step by step, we need to trust that he is going to straighten our path and guide it and lead us in the way that he would have us go. We need to trust him like a child trusts their parents. I can remember one year on Valentine's Day, my children came home from school and I had a scavenger hunt prepared for them. I had like little different chocolates and different clues that led up to the big surprise at the end, was that their dad and I were going to take them away overnight somewhere fun. They had no idea where we were going, but they were so excited. I said, "Oh, your bags are packed." They didn't care what was in the bags. They didn't know where we were going. They didn't know when we were coming home. They didn't ask one question. They were jumping up and down with glee because they trusted that we were going to provide for them while we were gone, that it was going to ultimately be a good trip for them and not something that would invoke harm or be bad for them in any way. And they knew that their needs would be met as we were gone. When we are preparing for a trip, and maybe God tells us, "I'm going to take you here," and we don't know all of the details up front, we want to know all the details. We have trepidation. We are skeptical. We want to know, well, how long are we going to be gone? Where are we going? How will this need be provided for? Where will I find this that I need? Did you remember to pack that? To have the faith of a child who just says, "Okay, I know you're calling me to go there and I'm going to go, and I'm going to trust that all of my needs will be met on that trip, and that you're going to take care of everything, and that will ultimately be for our good." See, God's not holding out on us. He's not trying to trip you up. He's not trying to do something that is going to be harmful to you in any way. That's not his character. So we can trust in him as he leads us and as we apply what he's showing us to do, that he's going to provide for us as we do it. And we can trust him. Thanks for joining me tonight, guys.